Um, okay. Well, first, can you just introduce yourself and introduce yourself?
hmm Do you want to ask me questions or what? How do you want to
Yeah,
do
I got a first question, and I'm
it?
also.
Okay.
Can you talk about your 50? It was 55 days, right? That you spent at
Yeah, at
LSU.
LSU, sure. Okay.
All right. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about your 55 days at LSU? And
Well,
give like a little run about who you are.
all right. So you want me to start now?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Uh, in 1953, as a graduate from Clark High School in New Orleans, I had applied to LSU and was rejected because LSU at that time, as well as most of the other southern white state universities, did not accept black students in the undergraduate schools. Thurgood Marshall and his staff had started suing the graduate schools in many southern states to get blacks into graduate schools because the black southern state universities many of them did not have graduate programs. When I applied to LSU in 1953, they sent me a letter indicating that I was not allowed to attend there because I was a person of color, and that there were two state schools in Louisiana that were set up to educate black citizens. One was Southern University, and the other was Grambling. My father, who was a civil rights attorney who worked with Thurgood Marshall in the Legal Defense Fund and had integrated through lawsuits the graduate schools at LSU, the law school in particular, the education school, School of Social Work, and I think one of the other schools in the art and performing arts departments. So there were black graduate students at LSU, but no undergraduates. The case went through its legal procedures, and I ended up being admitted to LSU in the fall of 1953 on a preliminary injunction, which was secured by my legal counsel to get me in school until the case was finally decided. I was applying for a 6-year graduate school program, which would have allowed me to get into law school and be out of law school and undergraduate school in 6 years, which Southern University did not have. Southern University did have a law school that was started when blacks began to sue LSU to go to their law school. The state legislature set up a law school at Southern University, which is still operating and doing very well and has more students in it now, black and white, than the LSU law school, and it's cheaper. However, the fight to keep undergraduates out was sort of the last stand for many of the white state universities in the South. My case in 1953 was one of the first cases that allowed blacks to enter the undergraduate school. Some of the other states, Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, those plaintiffs came along later in the 50s, in the 56s, 57. Now, the Brown case was decided a year after I was at LSU, which was in 1954. So I was a year before the Brown case, which overthrew Plessy Ferguson, separate but equal. My tenure at LSU was quite traumatic. I was 17 years old. I looked forward to college very much. My parents had gone to Howard University. My mother was a pharmacist, and my father went to Howard University Law School. So college was a very important milestone in my life as I wanted to go there and find my career and develop and be a part of a university experience. The experience that I had at LSU was quite depressing, and it was very off-putting. No one spoke to me. The state attorney general, the governor, the president of the university, the faculty, and the white students all decided that they were going to fight very hard to keep black undergraduates out of LSU. So the problem that they were facing, even though they were losing cases for graduate school, they decided that if they ignored me and treated me badly, just did things that were so ridiculously prejudicial, that I would leave. I lived in the dorm under the stadium. I had to be in the ROTC, which I didn't realize before I applied there. I didn't realize that it was a ROTC school, and freshmen had to be in ROTC. And so we had student cadet leaders in the dorm, and they ignored me. And if I walked in the showers or in the men's room to brush my teeth in the morning or to sit at a dining room table or in class, everybody moved away from me as much as possible. The professors practically ignored my presence. If I raised my hand in class, it was not acknowledged. One professor even in my presence stated that she didn't know how she was going to manage because she had never taught a Negro. She didn't say Negro, she said Negro before in my presence. I was sitting, it was a math class, I was sitting there and thinking, how could this person be allowed to be a professor and teach in a state university and have such bold, prejudicial, and segregationist attitudes? So it was quite a traumatic experience. I tried to keep a very low profile. I wasn't pushing myself on people. I went to class early and sat and let the students sit wherever they wanted to sit. In the dining hall, I would sit by myself. If anybody wanted to join me, that was fine. But I didn't isolate myself. I just didn't push myself into crowds of white students, making them feel that they had to do something in my presence. The experience was one that I thought would not occur, and I thought that the faculty, as adults, would at least be more welcoming, and also their job was to teach. After 55 days, there was a mistrial. The lawyers for LSU decided that the case had been tried in a one-judge court, and it should have been a three-judge court. And I was asked to leave the university after 55 days. And I did leave, and I was happy to leave because I didn't know that I could be successful in that type of environment without any support, without any acknowledgement that I was a student and they were there to support me and teach me. Whether they liked it or not, that was their job. So I enrolled immediately at Xavier University and had a wonderful experience there. I graduated from Xavier University in 1957. The case for LSU was finally decided in 1956, and I could have gone back to LSU for the rest of my junior year and my senior year. I chose not to go back. I graduated from Xavier in 1957, and then I enrolled the following fall at Columbia University, and I got a master's degree in counseling psychology in 1958. So the LSU experience was quite traumatic, and it took about 10 years before any sizable number of Black students enrolled. Instead of having individual students enrolled, they tried to do, my father and the lawyers working with the NAACP, groups of students to go, because it was too difficult and it was too challenging for an individual to have to deal with the amount of racial isolation and also some of the threatening behaviors of students as individual students. 30 some odd years later, I had never been back on LSU's campus and had no desire to go back there. I moved to New York and got married and had a career in New York. I was contacted by groups of Black students at LSU who were starting a Black alumni chapter, and they were going to name it after my dad in honor of his work at LSU. He was forced to sue LSU more than 13 times, one graduate school at a time, and then, of course, the undergraduate school, to slow down the process of integration in the state. That was not his choice. He would have preferred to do a blanket suit of the school to open up all of the university programs, but LSU decided, and the state legislature and the attorney general and whatever supported that approach to slow down the process of integration. But by then, 30 some odd years later, LSU was more or less integrated. However, the faculty was still not very well integrated, although there were some Black faculty members. So I got involved with the Black alumni, the AP Tureaud Black alumni chapter at LSU, and I have been very active with it ever since, and it's been a fantastic experience. And the Black alumni chapter got a building named after my father, which is the only building on campus named for a Black citizen. In 2011, with a co-author, Rachel Emanuel, who was a graduate student who went to LSU undergraduate and LSU master's program and got a PhD at the University of Texas, came back and was very active in the Black alumni chapter, and I co-authored a book called A More Noble Cause, which is the history of the civil rights movement in Louisiana. And it follows many of the years of my dad's career, but it goes back as far as Plessy Ferguson, and it goes back as far as the antebellum era, because I'm a product of slave woman, an enslaved woman, and a French family that owned plantations in Louisiana, very close to Baton Rouge. So it's been an incredible journey. In 2011 as well, I was given an honorary doctorate by LSU and have been very active with the university and the faculty and the students. And I think there's about 15 or 16% of the students at the university now are students of color in all of the programs there. And they have a very supportive diversity program that supports students from all parts of the world who are needing support and are diverse. And so there's an active movement right now also to rid the university of its Confederate history, including some of the people who were part of the segregationist movement. And they've taken the name of the former president, General Middleton, who was president when I was there. They've removed his name from the library just a few months ago.
I know you first said you graduated from Clark High School.
Yes, I graduated from Clark High School in 1953, and for 3 years that I went to Clark High School, I was on the platoon system, which meant that I went from 7 in the morning until noon, and the second cohort of students, Black students, came in and went from noon until 5 o'clock. The Black schools in New Orleans in the 50s were so crowded, and the Board of Education would not give the Black community sufficient Black schools. we had to go on split shift. It was quite an experience. I got a good education, but it was difficult, and we didn't have all of the other supportive resources. We certainly didn't have the space. The faculty worked very hard, and so did administrators. So it was a difficult time. And the schools in New Orleans were not desegregated until 1960, which was a case that my father championed for more than 8 years, the Bush case. And of course, it desegregated the public schools in New Orleans, 2 schools, McDown and 19, and the Fran School, with 4 young girls who were then in first grade. And that case changed the structure, the educational structure in New Orleans, and also a lot of the residential structure of New Orleans and the commercial structure of New Orleans, because a lot of people moved out into Metairie and moved out into Kenner, and the whole town, the white population and many of the white businesses and the support changed in the city of New Orleans in 1960 when the schools were integrated. And so a whole new culture in the city was created at the time that the public schools were desegregated. And predominantly now, if you look at the structure in New Orleans for public education, all of the schools in New Orleans now are charter schools. 90% of the public schools are enrolled with students of color. The white population is only about 10% of the public school students. And so there are still, most of the schools in New Orleans are de facto segregation because of the population being predominantly black. So in many ways, things have changed, but in many ways, things have not. And so there's still a struggle in other parts of the state where many of the communities still have black high schools and white high schools. And I still have lawyer friends of mine who keep me posted on what's going on in Louisiana, and many of them are still dealing with cases that my father filed over 40, 50 years ago to desegregate and to de facto segregate some of the public schools in the state of Louisiana. So, and these are things that people don't always know.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about your school? I'm reading that it closed recently, correct?
What school is that?
Clark. It closed recently.
Clark has closed?
That's what it says online. So it said it merged. So it was operating the last year by the First Line Schools, which is a charter system for K through 8.
Oh, it's a K through 8 school. It's not a high school anymore.
It said it operated the charter school operated the high school, but they closed in 2019.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. I've been in New Orleans since. Well, I haven't been since COVID, but I'm frequently in New Orleans 2 or 3 times a year. I didn't know that Clark High School had changed, but there's a problem now. Some of what they have done in New Orleans since Katrina was they did have a massive effort to rehabilitate, rebuild, and reestablish better physical structures, better schools. But there are still many schools in New Orleans that are up for sale because the whole population of the town and where the schools are and closing different schools, and of course the middle class community citizens go to private schools. New Orleans has a very unique structure and has had that structure for many years because of its Catholic population. There were always black and white separate Catholic schools that blacks went to and that whites went to that were segregated. Those schools are integrated now. And so they always had a network of private schools, predominantly by religion, but there are still many private schools in New Orleans as well. And so people who are middle class, black and white, choose to send their children to private schools and pay the tuition. There's still
like St. Long.
Sorry?
No, I was saying like St. Augustine.
Yeah, St. Aug, but there are many black kids in Jesuit and some of the other white Catholic schools or white private schools that were not previously open to blacks, but that also changed. The parochial schools were integrated just before the public schools were, and Archbishop Rummel, who was the Archbishop in the 40s and 50s, was very reluctant to integrate those schools, and of course all the churches, because they were segregated as well too by parishes. But my father worked with him and the community at large to do that, and so those schools have moved ahead. And of course, many of the black citizens choose to send their children to the white private schools because they feel that they may have a better opportunity of getting into different colleges and so forth, coming from schools that have had a very successful rate of admissions to various colleges. But St. Aug is an excellent school, and there are, many people, and it's not that the kids from even some of the charter schools, I don't know the details of a lot of the charter schools. I work with many committees in New Orleans and not-for-profit organizations that are involved in trying to change the structure and return the public school funds to public schools that have the jurisdiction of the Board of Education, an elected Board of Education over them, and not an appointed district of charter school people from the state. So New Orleans is a very complex place today for public education, and I don't want to consider myself an absolute authority on it because I'm not there on a daily basis, but there are lots of issues with charter schools that need to be examined, and I think New Orleans is unique in that they are the only city that I know of that is totally charter schools. So that's something that really needs to be, and there are organizations that are working on that and have been since Katrina and the reestablishment of the public schools in New Orleans, where there is accountability based on election and Board of Ed members and so forth and so on. So all of that has to do with the quality of education and the labor force and what happens to students, and also what happens to students who don't go to school. And if charter schools are selective, who's worrying about who's not in school? And I understand that there is a significant number of students who don't go to school. And what is the process for following up on that? And what about the students with disabilities? Who's following up on that? So there are lots of issues that I think need to be addressed that may not be actively addressed on a conscientious basis for students in New Orleans.
You said you graduated from Xavier. I'm just wondering, was there any reason you said your parents graduated from Howard? I mean, I read that too, but did both of your parents graduate from Howard, or just your father?
No, my mother and my father went to Howard.
Right,
My mother and her brother were pharmacy students at Howard, and my mother's family was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather was a pharmacist at Tureaud, Joseph Tureaud, and they owned drugstores uptown. And so my family, my mother also went to Talladega High School, which was a boarding school in Talladega, Alabama, because at the time that there were very few high schools in the city, or if any, for black kids. I think the education went up to about the 8th grade. My father left New Orleans to seek a high school education because when he was older than my mom by 7 years, because there were no black high schools in the city, and my father left when he was a teenager, went to Washington, and eventually finished high school when he was 21 years old in Washington, D.C., because he had to work and go to school. And then he worked and entered the law school and finished law school at Howard in 1925, came back to New Orleans in 1927. So, there were lots of issues and have been, with public education in the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana.
So, any reason why you didn't choose to go to Howard or like Grambling or
well,
you chose Xavier right in the city of New Orleans?
I had opportunity to choose any school I wanted to go to when I was ready to go to college. Although I'm one of 6 children. And my father wasn't a person who was interested in being a big wage earner and a rich lawyer. My father made a decent living being a lawyer, but he didn't practice law full time until he was 42 years old, because very few people would hire a black lawyer in Louisiana in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Even in the 50s. So my father worked at the Customs House with Walter Cohen, who was Commissioner of Customs, until he was 42 years old. But no, I had an option to go to Howard. I had an option to go anywhere I wanted to, because my father valued education and said to me, you pick the school you want to go to and we'll make it work. I chose LSU because I thought it was a good school, and the price was certainly right. And I thought it would work out. I thought of Xavier. I thought of Dillard. I thought of Southern. I never thought of Grambling because it was a little too far. And I thought of Howard. I used to go to Howard campus with my dad and my mom for activities and stuff like that, because we traveled around the country as a family. But I wanted to get the best education I could for the buck. There were 4 other children after me that had to be educated. My older sister was at Xavier and so forth, but I was very happy when I had to leave LSU to go to Xavier, and I just have to say that I got the best education in the world at Xavier. I wasn't educated. I was nurtured. I was taught how to think. I was taught how to speak better. I was taught how to know how to negotiate systems and to be a part of activities from a political standpoint of view, as well as a community standpoint of view, with the National Students Association and traveling to student conferences all over the country and being a part of a bigger picture. And I had the most dedicated, hardworking faculty members there, basically, who were black men and women, and a few nuns who were white. But it was a fantastic place to be. So by the time I graduated from Xavier, I was ready in 1957 to enter Columbia University and do well there and get a master's degree in 2 semesters. And so I was very, very pleased to have had, I think, the best education I could have gotten for me at Xavier University in the years that I was there. And I've not looked back or felt that I missed anything. And then I got married and worked in White Plains, New York, in public education. for 36 years and retired in 1995 from that position, and I've been retired now for 20 some odd years or more, 25 years or more, but am still active in educational issues and public service and civil rights activities, because we need to have voices that speak out and talk to people and share ideas with people about how to live in a multiracial society.
So you say you went to Columbia. So I've been interviewing James Meredith, and he went to Columbia too. And his story some of yours. You haven't mentioned, like, was there any kind of sign like of violence when you were attending LSU, or is it was somewhat just somewhat more like a social?
Well, first of all, LSU is a very big school. When I was there were probably over 20,000 students there. And there were students from foreign countries, but none of them were black-skinned, were countries where the people's skin were black. There were some people from some of the mixed cultural places, maybe in South America or whatever. But a lot of the people, first of all, I happen to be fairly light-skinned, but I don't look totally white. But a lot of the people didn't know who I was walking around the campus. They knew who I was when I identified myself by my name. So nobody really, except the kids in the dorm, the men in the dorm, knew who I was, and they totally ignored me. Nobody was violent against me, but they were very off-putting. They didn't speak to me. I remember once going to my physical education class on a Saturday morning, which was racquetball or handball, and I got to the class early because I didn't want someone to come in and say, all right, you play with that nigger or you play with that black guy, Tureaud. I would get on the court and I'd be practicing, and one young kid came in, a student, and he rushed in and he said, I got here early because I didn't want to have to be assigned to play with that black guy. And so we played. I didn't tell him I was the black guy. We played, and it went along. I beat him. He beat me. We were just average kids, blah, blah, blah. And the professor took the roll call at the end of the class because Saturday morning, nobody wanted to be in class. And if he took the roll call at the beginning of the class, people would just leave. So he waited till the end of the class, and then he took the roll. So when he mentioned my name, I'm here, I'm over here. And, of course, the student that played with me, he was, like, dumbfounded because he told me, he said, if anybody plays with that black guy, they're gonna distance themselves from him and they're gonna blackball the guy. That's the word around the campus. Anybody speaks to him will be disowned, will be blackballed by their friends, and so forth and so on. So when I said, I'm Tureaud, I'm here, that young guy looked, he looked very upset. So the other thing is people would send me notes. Students would put notes under my door. I would like to be your friend, but I can't. If I talk to you or socialize with you, I will be ostracized by the other students. Stick around, keep it up. Maybe in a year or two, things will change. That kind of nonsense. And I thought, I'm not sticking around here for a year and a half with this kind of nonsense. This is ridiculous. And the worst part of it was the adults. The adults were as off-putting and as prejudiced as the students were, and were as determined to have me leave. Mm. So, it was just a very, it was very frustrating and very, and I'm a sociable person. I like to meet people and exchange ideas. I was there to be educated, and none of that was happening. And I had to depend on my family to go home on weekends, or my mother came up one night to be with me because nobody had talked to me for several days or a week. And my mother had 5 other kids at home, and we didn't have but one car. She came on the bus, I mean, and I said, I can't keep doing this to you. She said, well, I just came up because I know you needed to be in contact and so forth and so on. It was just very tough. And I was 17 years old, and I was a mature 17-year-old, and I was realistic, but I didn't expect the adults to be as the only people that socialized with me or talked to me were the black men who did the grounds, cut the grass, or were in maintenance, and the black women who served in the dining hall because it was cafeteria style, and you had to go through with your tray, and they would put food on the tray or on your plate, and they would talk to me, and it's all right. We'll take care of it. You come visit with us over the weekend. We know what they're doing to you here, but you can come visit with us over the weekend or whatever. And I thanked them and whatever and said, well, thanks very much, but I've got to make my mark right here. So I was very happy to leave because I was caught in a situation where I was doomed to fail, and that's what they wanted. Because a lot of the professors and teachers or whatever, they weren't helping me, and they weren't answering my questions or helping me, So, and I couldn't join any student study groups. Nobody would allow me to do that. Nobody would welcome me in any study groups or anything. So I was very happy to leave, but I didn't know how to get out without being a failure. And they would say, look, see, he couldn't take it, they're not as smart as we are, they don't belong here, all of that stereotypical type thing. So for me as a test case, and I didn't go there to be a test case, I really didn't. And I volunteered. My father didn't recruit me for this position to be a test case, my father never asked me to do that. I volunteered to go there. I said, okay, I'll go to LSU. And my father said, fine, we'll work it out. And we didn't have long discussions about that. My father was a very easygoing guy. And he just said, you go wherever you want to go. So I said, well, I think I'll go to LSU. He said, okay, we'll work it out. And we did. My guidance counselor at LSU, when I told him I was applying to LSU, he called me up to his desk and he said, what are you doing? That's not going to work for you. You can't get in LSU. I said, well, look, I'm working with my dad and the lawyers, and all you have to do is send my transcript and all of that stuff to LSU, and we'll take it from there. And we did. But it wasn't a whole big charted out thing where I met with this one and that one and whatever. It just didn't work that way. My father was very easygoing, and he had plaintiffs all over the state. I mean, he sued all of the state universities. He's SLI and McNeese College and all of them, and worked with the law school at Loyola to integrate that with the dean of the law school and the president of the university. And so he was all over the place, and he was suing all of the parish public school boards of education in many of the parishes. He had over 100 civil rights cases that he filed over a period of time. So he was busy, but he was involved, and he worked, but he didn't do all of that by himself. He did that with the support of local people in various places, and then of course lawyers began to come out of the woodwork. Black lawyers began to graduate from law schools or move into the state who had been to law schools out of state, and so it was a critical time. The 60s got to be very busy, and the 50s were very active as well.
So I know in 1950, Roy S. Wilson, he and
Roy Wilson. Yeah.
What was your relationship with him?
I didn't know Roy. I was much younger then. Roy had come to my dad and asked to be a plaintiff to go to law school. And I didn't know him. I never met him. But and he had come out of the Army after the war and volunteered and was working with my dad. And then I heard later on that he had been discharged dishonorably from the Army, and he was embarrassed and he left. They kicked him out of school, and he left the state. And I often wondered what happened to him, and I never discussed it with my dad. And then, of course, other people came about, and I did know some of the first graduates, Dutch Morial, Ernest Morial, and Robert Carter, because they were Robert Collins. I'm sorry, because they were people that I knew prior to LSU. Robert Collins lived around the corner from where I lived when I was younger, and I knew him and his mom. And Dutch Morial I knew because his brother taught me at Clark High School. No, he taught me at Jones School. Mr. Walter Morial, Dutch's brother, was a CPA, and he taught math at Jones School, and finally became a principal of one of the elementary schools because he couldn't get a job as a black CPA in any. He worked for some of the black insurance companies, but his mainstay was public education. So I knew the Morial family, and Dutch Morial married into the Hydell family, Sybil Hydell, and they were family friends. Dutch Sybil Morial's father, Dr. Hydell, and my dad were college chums at Howard, and they were born on the same day and celebrated their birthdays together. So there was a lot of community support and activities from the black community, the longshoremen, the Pullman Porters, the labor union, supporting the NAACP and getting the vote out. And so there was just constant activity, and my father was just constantly in the mix of all of that. It was a very exciting time, but I felt, as I grew older and learned about Roy, I wondered whatever happened to him. Some people said that he may have gone to California, but I never heard what happened to him. And then, but I knew some of the other, Luttrell Payne, who was in public education and lived in Natchitoches, I think, or that part. He got in the School of Education, and
Charles E. Harrison.
I didn't know him, but I also knew what was the woman's name, Darrell Forster, who got into the nursing school. She had been a nurse and was head nurse or something at Flint Goodrich Hospital, and she was one of the first blacks to get into the medical department or the science department, and things like that. So I was familiar with a lot of the names and so forth, but you have to remember, I was a kid in 1953, and my focus was not all of my father's civil rights cases. My father didn't come home, and we didn't sit around the dining room or kitchen table talking about civil rights cases. We talked about cases and civil rights and integration. My mother was very active in civil rights with Girl Scouts and voting for women and the YWCA and doing things that women needed to do to support the NAACP and to support integration, as many families were. But it wasn't that we did all of that stuff all day long about civil rights. My father had his work to do, and I had my growing up to do with my friends and so forth and so on. But we were all involved. We used to go around on the days when there was voting. I used to run the sound truck through black neighborhoods with my buddies from high school, and my sisters and my mom and the rest of us would go out and be working at the polls, handing out flyers, and my father would go around checking out the various voting districts in New Orleans, making sure that the blacks were being allowed to vote. But it was a whole system of community support. in those days to help us move forward. And of course, we all had to deal with the segregated buses and trains and all of that stuff. So you were constant, and the drinking fountains and the stores, the stores that wouldn't allow you to try on clothes. And so it was just a whole system of constantly being involved in making things better. And some of it was depressing and insulting, and some of it was positive, So,
so how big do you think it was for Morial to graduate from like LSU Law School and then also go on to like be the first Black mayor in New Orleans?
yeah,
Like, can you speak on?
yeah. Well, Dutch was there when I was there in 1953. Dutch and Robert were in law school that year that I was there, and so they lived in town. They didn't live on campus. See, I could have done better. I could have been happier if I had lived in town. But I was a kid, and I wanted to have a full college experience. My parents talked about Howard and what a wonderful time they had, and I thought I could replicate that at LSU. Well, that was a little naive on my part to think that I could go in there. I would go on Southern's campus. I had friends there, and I'd spend time sort of hanging out with some of them, but I had to go back and face those people at LSU. And I didn't have a car. I mean, I had to go by bus or had somebody give me a ride or something. But Dutch and Robert lived together with the Black family in New Orleans, and they would be invited out to dinner. People liked having them there. They were young men. They weren't kids. I mean, they had been to undergraduate school and so forth and so on. So they were young adults. And I would see them once or twice. They'd come over and take me out to lunch or dinner. But I had to go back and face the music by myself. But they also didn't have to face that constant anxiety of being on campus and being isolated. And they were in law school. And they won their moot trial cases that year, the two of them. They did very well. And then Dutch, Robert had to go to work, I think, that summer. And Dutch stayed at LSU and finished ahead of him and became the first graduate. But I think Robert finished the semester after him and then went on to, and Dutch ended up starting his law practice in my dad's office. And he was a close friend. And Robert I knew, and we socialized together. And I saw Robert just a year, 2 or 3 years ago before he died at a bar one night in New Orleans. We invited him out with his daughter and whatever. I was in New Orleans for a conference, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and had drinks with him. He had gotten older, and he was having some issues of with dementia, but he was whatever. So my relationship with a lot of these people were community-based. And, of course, there was a very supported Black community in Baton Rouge. Black professionals and Black working-class people supported the Black kids who were going to LSU, men and women who were going to LSU, and opening up their homes for them and encouraging them to finish and to speak and to meet with kids in the community and show them, I mean, that this was a place where they could go to school. And I had a very enriching but also upsetting experience one morning. I was sitting outside. I used to leave my dorm room because the kids on either side of me would bang on the walls all night to keep me up and to do things like that and to disturb me. And the rooms that I had in the dorm were 3 students to a room. So there was windows. We didn't have air conditioning. And so students on my left and right side, there were 6 of them, 3 in each room. They could take turns banging on the walls or putting their radios in the window and focusing the noise, and they were trying to run me out of the dormitory, and so I would also sometimes I would go stay with a friend who lived near the campus with his family, and they would let me come and stay with them, have dinner with them, and just get away from the campus for a while. But so I would get up early in the morning before the students got up, take a shower right quick, because if I walked in the men's shaving shower area, they would all walk out, whether they were soaped up down and not shaving or brushing their teeth. They would all leave. So I would get up early and shower and get out. And I was sitting outside. My dorm room entrance to the stadium was right by Mike Cage, the mascot at LSU. So I was out there talking to Mike about being a prisoner, and this truck pulled up, and it was a foggy morning in October, November, and this truck pulled up, and someone had told me, you got to be careful. If you see any people driving trucks near you or whatever, some of these Looney Tunes from the community might come in, and just don't walk on the sidewalk near the street. Walk off the campus. Stay away from the busy streets on campus. And so I thought, well, if it's a white kid with a Confederate flag or rifle rack in the back, I'm not running from anybody. But this man got out of his truck, and he was a black guy. And he had on a farm, like bib overalls and stuff. He was a working guy. And he asked me if I was AP Tureaud, and I said yes. He said, well, I've been coming around trying to find you because I want my son to meet you. And he went into the truck and brought his son out, who was about 8 or 9 years old. And he had him meet me, and we talked. And he said, I want my son to see you here because I want him to come to school here. And he should know that this is a school that black kids can come to. So, putting that kind of pressure on me, and I'm trying to get out of there gracefully, put a lot of pressure on me because I knew that I wasn't going to be successful there. But my father called me and said, I'm coming up to the campus tonight. So I said, well, you can stay with me in my room. I've got plenty of space. He said, well, you're going to have to leave the school. So I said, what's going on? So he said, well, there's been your preliminary injunction, which you've been admitted on by Judge Skelly Wright, has been revoked. And your case has to go back to court, and it's going to be tried in a 3-judge court. And when that's done, he said, but I can file immediately with the Supreme Court in Washington, so that they don't keep you out of school. You can come right back, but you're going to have to leave. So I said, don't go to the Supreme Court. I just want to get out of here. And now, if I can get out, it's not on me. I didn't flunk out or I didn't leave. I had to leave. He said, well, I thought you would say that. So I've asked Xavier to enroll you immediately. So I left LSU like on a Friday. And by Monday or Tuesday of the next week, I was able to attend Xavier. And now you have to remember how late I was in the semester. I had been almost 6 weeks out of the first semester. So when I got to Xavier, some of the professors at Xavier, although they knew my situation, they were not that satisfied with me coming into their class. And I told them, I said, look, I don't want to sit at home a whole semester, waste a semester. So let me in and I'll pass or fail. I'm not asking for any special favors. And I took 12 credits instead of 16. And I went to summer school that summer, and I did okay. I passed the courses that semester, and then went to summer school and passed those courses. And I told my dad, I said, I don't care how the case turns out. I'm not going back to LSU. I'm not going. He said, well, you don't have to go. Said, pardon?
What would you in like why not just Southern? 'Cause I mean you feel in Baton Rouge and stuff, you know.
Well, because I wanted to be at home.
You
And I had a girlfriend in New Orleans, and my family was there, and I just needed to be with my family and to be rid of that terrible feeling of being abused and neglected and so forth. And I had friends at Xavier, you know, and I knew Xavier. I mean, my father taught business law at Xavier as when he first came back to New Orleans, and so forth and so on, and blah blah blah. So anyway, and then the following year, my sophomore year, I took a full load. I got very involved in student activities, and I was president of my sophomore, junior, and senior year class. Each year I was elected president of the class, got involved with student government, and enjoyed my experience at LSU very much, and had a great nurturing educational time, and as I said, went to Columbia and did well there and whatever. So it was the right thing for me to do. I would have been very unhappy if I had to go back. And one day I was walking across Davis campus. I was a junior at the time, and this huge TV truck with a crew and one of those satellite dishes on it or whatever pulled up. I don't know how they knew where I was, but I was walking across the campus, and this truck pulled up and said, "You're AP Tureaud, right?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Well, the Supreme Court has just handed down a whole bunch of civil rights cases from Southern white state universities that and they passed on all of those cases and told the states to integrate those schools." And that was in 1956. That was the spring of 1956. And your case was one of them. So I said, "Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And when are you going back to LSU?" I said, "I'm graduating from Xavier University next year. I'm not going back to LSU, but I applaud every student that wants to go to LSU. It's a good school, and I think they should take advantage of it. And it's a state school that we support, and I'm glad that it will eventually be integrated so that blacks can have more educational opportunities throughout the state of Louisiana." And so, and I never, as I said, I never got involved. Now, I married a girl from Baton Rouge and would be in Baton Rouge often over those years and still go to Baton Rouge a lot. But up until the time that the Black Alumni Chapter was formed almost 33 years ago, I never cared to go back on that campus because it was terrible experiences that I had. And but I've been very active with them, and they've been very supportive. And we just had a whole thing where they honored me this year for they have the Black Alumni Chapter has a Legends Award every year, and they called me and said, "You're going to be the legend this year." And I said, "I've been the legend. You guys have done a lot for me. I don't need to be a legend. Pick someone else." And they said, "No, we want you to be the legend this year, and it's going to be an online a Zoom event, and the president's going to be there, and we're doing a lot of activities around civil rights." And I said, "Well, if I'm the legend, what I want to do is dedicate the program to all of the students who were not allowed to attend LSU before I was able to attend LSU. So let's make it for the students who were not allowed, because there were a lot of black students that would apply to LSU before my case, and they would get letters like I got and told them they couldn't go to LSU. So we did that, and it was wonderful. And the interim president, who is still interim because they're searching for a new president, asked me to come to LSU as soon as COVID is over so he could give me face-to-face a formal apology for how I was treated when I was there. And I said, well, LSU has done very good things by me and my family. I don't think that's necessary. And he said, no, I think it's necessary and I want to do it. So I said, okay, I'll do it, but it has to be when COVID is over. Now, 2 years ago, a white woman called me who lives in New York City, who is a playwright. She's written an opera on Emmett Till. She's white. She was from New Orleans. She was at LSU as a student when I was there. She lives in New York now. And she said, I wrote a letter to the Daily Reveille, which was the LSU newspaper, 67 years ago when you were a student there, complaining about how they were treating you. And I was going to send that letter to the newspaper, but I was living in a sorority house, and I was afraid to send that letter because I was afraid that I would be blackballed and treated poorly. But I decided that has bothered me all of these years. I'm going to send that letter to the newspaper now. And she contacted the newspaper contacted me. They did a whole issue on her letter, and they did a history on that issue of the Daily Reveille, which is not daily now. I think it comes out once a week, on integration and segregation at LSU with the woman's letter. Her name is Claire Koss. And so the president said, and when you come down, I want Claire Koss to come down with you, and we want to have a program about what happened and why she wouldn't send her letter in, and I want that to be for faculty and students. So we plan to do that hopefully as soon as we can travel. So LSU is still trying to rid itself of the history that it's had, but also to move forward and also to make amends, and so forth. And the Black Alumni Chapter there, which has my dad's name, is very active in that regard. And so, things have come along, but I still think they need to do a lot with faculty. They need to increase the amount of support that they give students, and they need to integrate all of these sorority houses and frat houses and integrate the whole university, and certainly the faculty. So a lot has been done, but a lot more can be done.
So my mom actually graduated from Xavier, and my godmother lived there. So last time I was in New Orleans, it's something I noticed when I was driving, because I was actually looking for schools in New Orleans to go to. So I went to Tulane, did a visit, and a few others, and I noticed. I went to did a tour at the University of New Orleans, and I noticed a SUNO, a SUNO school, and I was just like, what's SUNO? I know I've heard of Southern, I'm familiar with Southern, but I was just thrown off by the SUNO, so I got back to my godmother. I was asking what's SUNO? And like, oh no, it's Southern, but it's in New Orleans. So I was just like, oh wow, like you got SUNO and then you got SUNO. So I was like, what? Because it threw me because my HBCU, I'm from St. Louis, so our HBCU, we have an HBCU called Harris Stowe, and this actually was a merger of the black HBCU, the black school, black college, and then the white college. So it kind of threw me.
Louisiana has a crazy system. They have, and they've kind of consolidated some of that, but they still have the SUNO system. They have the LSU system, and then they have the state colleges like SLI and McNeese, and all of these come under various jurisdictions. Now, my father's opinion about all of that was because there's been a lot of talk about, especially when LSU was being integrated and so forth and so on years ago, about consolidating LSU and Southern in Baton Rouge. And, of course, the blacks opposed that because they were going to lose their jobs, and hire white people to be the president or the dean of the law schools and stuff like that. And so they have fought it. But my father's opinion was the more schools we have, the better off we are. Keep Southern, keep whatever you want to support, and the blacks will continue to run those schools. There are a lot of black kids who would be intimidated to go to a white school like UNO in New Orleans, because they've come out of high schools where they know they don't have the equivalent education, or they don't feel comfortable competing with white students. Now, many of them go to Southern schools, or go to Grambling, or they go to SUNO schools, Southern or whatever, and they prepare themselves to be competitive, and then they may enter some of the graduate programs at LSU, because LSU has campuses in other parts of the state, but there is still that issue. Now, I'm not speaking generally for all of these people, because I don't know that, but I know that the black community is very supportive. And Southern Law School, I remember when Southern Law School started. Southern Law School started when in the 1950s, when Charlie, what was his name, sued the law school. He was the first black student to sue the law school, and that's when they started the Southern Law School that had one student in it. And he didn't get to go because my father took his case off the docket because he was being threatened, and my father thought his life was in danger. And he never finished law school, but he taught at Clark High School. He taught at Southern, and his family his son is still around, his daughter-in-law, and I'll think of his name in a minute. But so my father said when they started the law school at Southern, sure, start the law school. The more lawyers we have, the better. There was a time when my dad, for numbers of years off and on, was the only black lawyer in the state. And he didn't like that. He didn't think that was fine. He didn't make more money because he was the only black lawyer. He was overworked. He wanted as many black lawyers as possible to help him take care of some of these all these civil rights cases, and to help
Charles Hatfield. Not to get too off, but Charles Hatfield is the name.
Charlie Hatfield. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm in touch with Charlie Hatfield's daughter-in-law and his family, and they're in Baton Rouge now, and so forth and so on. So all of that history. Louisiana has a very unique history in terms of its a process through integration. It was earlier than most of the other states. The Plessy-Ferguson case came out of Louisiana, in the 1780s. I mean, in the 1890s, and all of that stuff. So, and my great-grandfather, who was a slave on a plantation in Convent, Louisiana, Bagatelle Plantation, who was never freed, who fought in the Civil War with the Union Army, served in the Reconstruction Legislature for 3 terms. His name was AP Tureaud. So all of that history goes back years and years and years. And so Louisiana has had a very long and involved and productive civil rights history. I mean, 1/3 of the Reconstruction Legislature, which existed for 12 years, was black, because they could vote and they could vote people in. And so the history is long, but we're not taught our history, and it's not taught in the white schools. I don't know what the curriculum is. I'm trying to work with people now to see how inclusive the mandated state history is for Louisiana, and how much of it is black history included. And of course, now that this is Black History Month in February, I get calls. I'm doing two Zoom meetings this month, because people find black historians during the month of February. Our history should be a part of every month, and we should be incorporated in the history of the state of Louisiana and the history of America for the 12 months of the year, not just during 1 month of the year. So there's a lot of work we have to do, but you guys are doing a good job in the media business and keeping things alive, and we're trying to work together. I just saw where Harvard has just sent out a letter about. I've been working with people on finding slave graves all through the Mississippi River Valley, along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, where plantations used to be, where there are slave grave sites now popping up every time somebody wants to build a plant along where those plantations were, and all kinds of stuff. And Harvard just announced that they have remains of slaves that have been in their museums for years, and they're going to try to find where those remains are and do the right thing and give them a decent burial. So, stuff is, maybe this will be a period of advancement in all areas of civil rights activities. I hope it will be, because there's still a lot to do.
So like I didn't hear I haven't heard your story honestly, and I forgot I came across it, but luckily I came across it, and same for James Meredith. I've never heard of James Meredith, and honestly, it wasn't until I read Chaos for the Community, Martin Luther King, where it's like he started talking about James Meredith, one of those unsung heroes and stuff. But
I knew all of the lawyers, the civil rights lawyers who handled those civil rights cases for the NAACP. Constance Baker Motley, who was one of Thurgood's only black female chief staff people. She was from one of the Caribbean islands, Nevis or one of them, but she became an American citizen. And they used to come to New Orleans when I was a kid. When I was in high school, they would come to New Orleans, and at Xavier, because the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals was in New Orleans, and all of those cases were being, all of those civil rights cases, including James Meredith's case, were appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals before they got to the Supreme Court. And I would have to go pick them up sometimes, Thurgood and his staff people, at the airport or the train station, and then we'd have to find housing for them and take them to lunch, and they worked out of my dad's office and stuff. So I learned, and sometimes I would be the chauffeur for them. My dad would say, "You're not going to school today. I got something great for you to do today. You're going to go pick up Thurgood and his crew and take them around and so forth and so on, and meet the community people and take them to lunch and all of that stuff, and I'll meet you later." And so I got to hear a lot about some of those cases, and I remember Constance Baker Motley talking about the James Meredith case. But if you go online and you go to the Louisiana Public Broadcasting and you look for the documentary Journey for Justice, it's a story of my dad's civil rights.
I watched it. Yeah, you told me about. I watched. I watched it.
Yeah, and
I was just wondering though. I was just wondering like why, because Ruby Bridges is a story that's like I feel like my generation is when we hear a lot.
Yeah.
So I just wonder like why is Ruby Bridges so big, but it's more and more like hearing you talk. I think somewhat it's because like she was so young.
Yeah. And I knew I know the other three women that integrated McDonough 19. They just had a celebration because one of them is buying the McDonough 19 school and turning it into a community activity. I never met Ruby, but I know people who know her, and hopefully one day we'll get to meet. But those kids were in first grade, and they chose girls because they didn't want black boys in the schools with white kids. They had all of these things that were happening, and Judge Skelly Wright handled that case. My dad worked on that case. It was the Bush case. Mr. Bush, who started that case when his kids were little, his name stayed on the case, but his kids, that case was in litigation for 8 years. His kids were out of the public schools by the time that case got to court. But that was the name of the case, and it was not the name of any of the families that were involved. But the judge and the lawyers and the school board picked three. They tested those girls, and they picked four little girls to be the test case. And Ruby was the one at Brand School, and then the other three were at McDonough 19. And they had terrible times. So those kids would punch them and hit them, and they couldn't do anything about it because their parents told them, if you hit back, they're going to suspend you. That's what they want you to do, So, and then after 1 year, they moved the three girls out of McDonough 19 to another school. But they had terrible times, and we all did. We all did. We still are. I mean, you look at the population of New Orleans and all of the people there who are living below the poverty line and have their kids in charter schools and live in different parts of the town and are still making below wages. I mean, I was in New Orleans 2.5 years ago for something, and New Orleans had announced the city was giving everybody free flu shots who worked in the tourism industry. And they were telling me how wonderful it was that New Orleans were giving those people free flu shots. And I said, those people have jobs. Their bosses hire them part-time so they don't get insurance. And that's why the city has to give them free flu shots. That's not a wonderful thing. You should fight for full-time jobs and higher salaries so those people can pay for their own, get insurance, and have flu shots and don't have to worry about the city giving them flu shots to keep the billion-dollar tourism industry going. So there's all of that stuff still going on in New Orleans. And some of the community that I grew up in the Ninth Ward, looks like something that you would see in Tobacco Road right now. And that's in the middle of the city of New Orleans. Unpaved streets, no drainage on the streets. And our house, my sister still lives in that house. That's our house that's been designated as a historic landmark.
On Parker, is that the word?
On Parker Street, yeah. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, she's got a nice house and she keeps it up well, but it's a disaster. You go there are weeds all over the place and houses still falling down from Katrina that have never been torn down or whatever. And a lot of people never see that part of the city of New Orleans, So there's still a lot of stuff to be done.
So, I'm not like, I know New Orleans, but not like that well. But so your street in like the Trim neighborhood?
No, it's in the 7th Ward. It's right off of Elysian Fields, and there's a little park. They just designated part of the 7th Ward as a historic district, and they called it the AP Tureaud Historic District. Now that's supposed to help them get tax credits and help redevelop the neighborhood and so forth and so on. But it's an old community, and we never lived. The street that we lived on was never paved, and it never had drainage, and it still doesn't. So we're trying to do a lot of work. And the park that they dedicated for my dad with his statue and all of that is dedicated to 15 people. And that was damaged by Katrina, and it was vandalized by some black kids who took stones and bricks and broke up the granite base that it was on and destroyed the writing that was on the base. And it's being rehabbed now by a private woman who's in construction, and she's gotten money, some from the city and some from other resources, Von Furia, and we're rehabbing that park and the monument. But it's a city park. It doesn't belong to my family. And the city should have done stuff with it years ago. Katrina's 15 years ago. And it's all rusted out, and the statue needs to be refinished. I mean, it's because it's in a black neighborhood. If that statue and park was in a white neighborhood, it would have been finished right after Katrina and rehabbed. That stuff still goes on. Mm-hmm. So I go back. I do a lot of work with the city and civil rights stuff, and it's disheartening though, because there's a lot of money in New Orleans. Now, there are a lot of black people who do very well, and many of them help a lot and do good stuff. But there's a lot of there's a lot of crime in the city of New Orleans, as you well know. Yeah. So there's a lot of crime because there's a lot of poverty. And there's a lot of poor education. So we're not helping these little kids that come to school at 5 and 6 years old get out of the ghetto attitude. And So by the time they're ready to go to high school, they're in the swing of poverty, getting jobs that pay minimum wage, stuff like that. So
I know you said, wait, you go to.
Sorry?
No, I said I know you say you would pick up Thurgood Marshall when he came to like New Orleans and stuff, and I know like one of his hangout spots was Dookie Chase. So
Yeah,
I was just wondering.
Well, Dookie Chase's restaurant was just a few blocks down the street from where my father's office was which was the Knights of Peter Claver building, which was torn down when they built I-10, and it had been a former hospital, the old French hospital. And so they would go down and eat at Dookie's, or food would be brought up to them, because they would be working in my dad's office, and some of them would stay with different people around town and so forth. Some of the lawyers would stay with us. Some would stay with Daniel Bird, who was the field representative for the NAACP, or they had friends in town, or my parents would find places for them to stay. Some of them stayed at Dillard, because Dillard had a guest house there. And my family was friends with Dr. Dent, who was president of Dillard, and they would let some of those lawyers stay, in the guest house and stuff like that. Everybody did everything they could during those days to help out and to help us get, the accommodations and open up integration and segregation as much as they could, But we still don't have the corporate support. We still don't get the support from the state legislature. We don't have the power base that Atlanta has. Atlanta's a very better off city. Yeah, because and Andrew Young, who's from New Orleans, and I knew Andrew. His family grew up with my family. His dad and my dad went to Howard together. His father was a dentist, Dr. Andrew Young. And I remember Andrew Jr. said that when people were doing Black Lives Matter stuff a few years ago, 2 years ago, he was on TV, and I heard him say something about, I'm for, and the name changing and all. He said, I'm for substance and not just changing names and things like that. He said, when I was mayor of Atlanta and the airport was being expanded, we worked out a system where the city would get a certain percentage of all of the revenue that came into that airport. And that brings in billions of dollars right now for the economy. And that's what we have. We have, Atlanta has become the capital for Black enterprise. And I remember when Atlanta used to be, New Orleans and Atlanta used to be always competing for stature. And a lot of people from New Orleans went to Atlanta and have done very well there, So
Miami.
Yeah. So and Andrew and his family, very supportive and have done a lot of good. And but New Orleans still has its issues, and we've made a lot of progress. But we still don't have enough corporate wealth, and so that gets to be a problem all over. But it's still we used to have 5 or 6 very income-producing insurance companies. We had our own hospital. We had all sorts of networks, but we were required to do that in order to maintain the Black community. With integration, we haven't had as much of the corporate development that we need. There's still lots of people who make good money in New Orleans, but we still don't have it. But that's typical, I think, throughout many parts of the country. So are you based in St. Louis or what?
right now I'm living in Atlanta. But yeah, I was raised in St. Louis.
Mhm.
I was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Okay.
So St. Louis really
Yeah.
like my home.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
went to
Yeah.
Morehouse too, so like Atlanta kind of like a pit
Sure.
stop on my way to Miami.
Yeah.
So
I'm in Sarasota now. We come here for the winter. We'll be here until March. It's an interesting part of Florida, and there's a lot of money here, but it's not black money. It's
so where is Sarasota? What major city is there next to? I don't know like every part of Florida. But.
so Sarasota's on the west coast. It's right below.
So like Tampa.
It's right below Tampa. It's an hour below Tampa.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's very well. It's a very well. Florida's got a lot of money in it. A lot of white money here in Florida.
Yeah, Spanish money too.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of Spanish money on the East Coast and Miami and so forth. I do it to get out of the weather. But there's a lot of art and culture, and there's a big black community here. People come from the Northeast Coast or from Atlanta or whatever. A lot of professional retired people come here and do a good job helping the local black community. But whatever. So what else can I help you with?
I was gonna ask you about Leah Chase. I know she was a recent pastor and she was big in
Oh
in
yeah,
New Orleans and stuff. I'll ask you that.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you what. When I was in college at Xavier, I've known Leah Chase all my life, and knew her husband Dookie and her children, and my wife's cousin married into the family, and so forth and so on. But Leah Chase, I've known all my life, and when I was in college, we tried to organize at Xavier. We tried to organize an interracial council of college students, and so we reached out to Sophie Newcomb and Loyola, and forget Tulane. Tulane wouldn't have anything to do with it, and Dillard and Xavier, and we would meet and as students and try to talk about moving forward and integration. And we all are part of the National Students Association, so we'd meet at conferences and things. So after a while, and white kids don't get to know us, and they don't, they always want us to meet at their place, So I said, well, you're going to meet at our place next, and it's not going to be at the university. I want you to meet in town where black people live so you can get to know. So I went to Leah Chase, and I said, look, have these white kids come from, and meet with us, and I want them to sit down and have drinks with us and food and stuff and so forth and so on and so on. She had a room over the back of the building that we used to call the upstairs room, and that's where Thurgood and them would meet. But on a weekend, if you weren't eating, you could go up there and have drinks and stuff. So I said to her, is it okay if I bring these white kids here? Because, in those years, in the 50s, it was against the law. Police saw you going in places with white people and so forth. They'd come in and arrest you. Let the white people go and arrest you. So she said, you can bring them here anytime. They will not come in this place. And they better not come in. I said, Leah Hawkins, she said, don't worry, we take care of them. So anyway, she would stand up. And so we met with the white kids and so forth and so on. But she was always a leader. You could always go to her. She was always up front and so forth. And she always opened her restaurant up to everybody. And, of course, when Thurgood and them came, she knew Thurgood would be in town, and she would, everybody took care of that group of people because they were the leaders. They were the ones that were saving us from continuously being segregated. So all of that. But Andrew and his symbols and substance, I think, went a long way. But Leah and people in New Orleans always had a different flavor about integration because of all of the mixed race stuff that happened down there. Half of us are half white anyway, So
Yeah, I definitely noticed that with Southern soon. I was like, that was like something definitely a lot of awakening for me.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
about Southern. And I was like, okay, it's probably because of Southern.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. So that was easier, but that was also part of that also that racial thing about blah blah blah, the Creoles against the blacks and all that stuff. But that didn't happen in the more advanced communities and groups. My parents went away to school. They didn't have those prejudices. Everybody was welcome and integrated. And my father worked with everybody. He worked with the uptown ministers who were not Catholic, and the labor unions, and Chink Henry, and the longshoremen, and the Pullman porters, and all that kind of stuff, because that was the only way you were going to get things done. And they all supported the NAACP, even when it was outlawed in the state. The people who didn't have to depend upon white people for their jobs continued to support the NAACP during those years, and continue to support the litigation of those cases, and transporting people around all over the state. I mean, if you left New Orleans and Baton Rouge were fine, but you got out of New Orleans and Baton Rouge and you got to Shreveport and other places, you were in serious trouble. And so all of that, but people worked together and formed coalitions, and that was the way things got done. And Norman Francis, with the Freedom Riders at Xavier, and Albert Dent at Dillard, and working with also the white community, many of them who were Jews, many of them like I'm trying to think of the family name that owned Sears Roebuck, and those large corporations that had a great deal of influence in New Orleans. And so all of those things were important, and save our schools during the public school time when they were integrating the schools and the state wanted to close the schools and give vouchers to the white families with not enough money for black families, so they wouldn't go to integrated schools. So New Orleans has always had that kind of uniqueness, but and it's still we have black mayors, but we don't have enough control of legislatures of the legislatures, because that's where the money is. The money is in the legislatures, not in the cities. The cities are basically depend upon, because the legislature sets the tax revenues and how much money can be shared.
Like senators and probably.
Yeah. But I don't know.
You said Norman Francis. I was gonna definitely ask you a question because I know he just got a parkway named after him.
Yeah, that just happened last week, and my nephew Mark Raymond, who's my great nephew, he was the one that started that, and they just dedicated that thing last week, I think. and so I watch it. It's you can see some parts of it on YouTube, but Norman was came to Xavier. Norman was dean of students of male students when I was there. He was still in graduate school at Loyola in law school, and when I was failing math with that terrible woman who was my math teacher, who said she didn't know how she could teach a Negro. She was an old white lady, and I felt sorry for her because she was near retirement, but she was just so prejudiced, and she would come to class. She would have mittens on at LSU in October because her hands were always cold with the fingers cut out. I mean, that's how old she was. And she was standing there preaching that she couldn't teach a Negro in my presence. So she wouldn't call on me. I had questions about, how do you do this problem? I don't understand what she just said. She wouldn't call on me. So I told my dad, so he said, well, you come home next weekend, and Norman comes to my office to do his studies on weekends, and Norman had a degree in math from Xavier, was a brilliant math student, and he'll help you with your math problems. Norman tutored me for 2 weekends, and I went back and took the weekly quiz, and I set the curve. And this woman announced the beginning of the week after the exams were corrected. She said, "I don't know how this happened, but she finally called me by my name. Mr. Tureaud set the curve." Now, can you imagine somebody saying that in front of you? She didn't know how it could happen, how it's possible. So that's the kind of stuff.
That's kind of math teachers.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I was dealing with as a 17-year-old, and singling me out like that and embarrassed, and I, what I wanted to say to her, but I couldn't, and I did. But Norman was great, and we still keep in touch. He's failing now. He needed help getting up to walk to the microphone the other day, but he was there, and his wife Blanche was teaching PE there, and we used to do a lot of stuff together when he was dean of students and stuff like that. And then he became president and built Xavier from the ground up, because he was the one who really expanded the base of that school and did tremendous work. And he could have had any job he wanted. He could have been mayor anytime he wanted in that town, and he didn't want it. He was dedicated to Xavier. And his brother, who was a priest, was similar to him and worked on a lot of civil rights cases and lynchings in other parts of New Orleans that he and my dad worked with. And all of these people were just incredible. And I haven't seen Norman since COVID, but he, and of course, started Liberty Bank and all of that stuff. They started credit unions. There was a lot of that kind of community activation, and so I've had the privilege of knowing some of the most unique men and women. And Burnett Johnson, who is now just retiring from the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. I don't know if you know her story.
Louisiana.
Yeah, she's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Well, she's from New Orleans. She was the first Black woman to graduate from LSU Law School. She was younger than Dutch in that crowd, but she used to go to my dad's office, and she was a part. My father sort of mentored her a little bit, and my dad used to meet with a bunch of the young lawyers, Revis Ortiq and Lola Eli and Ben Johnson and Dutch Morial and Robert Collins on weekends. They'd come to my dad's office on weekends and sit around and talk. My father had a law library, and they could use his reference books and stuff like that. And they started the Martinet Society. Louis Martinet was a lawyer that defended Homer Plessy during the Homer Plessy case, and my father admired him very much, Louis Martinet, and he went to a law school during Reconstruction when there was a Black law school at the University of New Orleans during Reconstruction for Blacks. There was a law school, a medical school, and a school of pharmacy during the period of Reconstruction in University of New Orleans or in Strait University. And so my father started the Martinet Society, which now has 3 chapters, one in Shreveport, one in Baton Rouge, and one in New Orleans, and hundreds of lawyers that belong to that. But my father believed in organizing, collaborating, and honoring the history, of the people who made contributions. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, anyway, but that's the kind of stuff that people don't talk about because they don't know the history, and many of us have not written enough about it. But I don't know if you've seen a copy of the book that I co-authored with Rachel Emanuel.
I've not read part of it. I just found out about it, so we'll get it.
Well, get it sometime and take a look through it. It's got a lot of stuff in it. It tells you a whole lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know. And it took us 12 years to write that book, and it was published by LSU Press. And the best way to buy it is just to get it through Amazon, because it's much cheaper that way, and you get it faster. But it's just a history that we don't know. And there's a big push today to get Black history into the state curriculum of all of the states as part of the history of the state, and make sure that it's included, So that's what we need to do.
So, like, what are some of your, I know you say you taught at White Plains School and you taught at Hunter College and stuff. So, like, what are some of your missions today? Like, you said.
Well, yeah. I was always interested in public education, and so I went to Columbia, and when I got out, I got married, and I moved to White Plains, and I started programs for students who needed to be in high school. And at that time in New York, in 1960, a lot of handicapped kids were not allowed to go to high school if they were retarded or emotionally disturbed or whatever. And so the Greenberg Law was passed, and so a lot of these good school districts started programs, and I was lucky enough to start one of these programs, and taught in White Plains for 8 years, and then I became the director of special education. And my whole thrust was to normalize services to handicapped or disabled students or children with special needs as they became. Take away all these nonsense labels and stop labeling people. Include them in regular programs. Put them on regular buses with regular kids and their siblings. Provide special help if they need help on the buses, and integrate them into all activities in the public schools. Don't isolate them. And send the teachers in that need to help them wherever they can be. And the more severely handicapped children need special services. So the whole process of integration and public education. The problem with fighting for all of that is the federal government passed the Education for All the Handicapped, but they never funded the programs, and they bounced the responsibility back to the state. And when you give states the right and the mandate to do things, the level of services are very different from state to state. And that's been the problem all along. And so many states have very obsolete and exclusionary programs for children with special needs and students with special needs who can stay in public schools now until they're 21 years old. And so some schools have maintained high standards, and some schools have maintained almost no standard. And monitoring became a big issue then. It's not a big issue anymore. And I think a lot of things have changed. I've been out of the business of education, public education, for 25 years now. And I still do some advocating, but most of my community service work now is being done around civil rights or human rights activities, and especially in Louisiana and New Orleans. I still get called on to do things up this way as people learn about Louisiana and the history, or they see the documentary, or they read the book, or people pass things on, people that hear me talk and so forth and so on. And I get invited to travel all over the country. Just before COVID, I was in Iowa doing a conference there for people or whatever. So I enjoy it. Gives me a chance to get out and do things, and to remind people that it still exists. Problems still exist. I mean, I was in Iowa and spent a lot of time with the Native American population and looking at how their communities have been so devastated and have been denied access to so many services and so forth and so on. So, and helping NAACP organizations get membership and working with the national office with the Legal Defense Fund. I still have contact with some of the people there and who are working on cases throughout the country and in Louisiana, where there are still many civil rights violations and problems with the courts and how some of the parishes in Louisiana are gerrymandered the vote so that the blacks don't get a chance to elect judges and things like that. So that's what I keep busy doing, you know. So we have to, and right now with Black Lives Matter, we have to all speak up, you know, speak up, speak out, and get active and get involved and support these associations and involvement. I have a house at Cape Cod in a little town that's predominantly white, and we're trying to do some work there. There are some black families and there's some West Indians that come up from Jamaica and stuff, but white people need to hear these stories and need to know that there's stuff to do. You know, just because they live in a town where there aren't many of these problems, Native Indians that have been pushed out of these areas, the Mashpee Indians in different parts of the Cape, they've never had a good, you know, experience, and all their land was taken away from them. And we still need to do work for them, you know. So wherever you are, there's work to be done around people of color, whether you're in America or in Europe or in England or in France or in Spain. There are people of color who need to be supported. So the beat goes on.
Mm-hmm. So what's your stance on like the NAACP now versus like, you know, growing up, you know, and seeing it in like some like big pivotal times,
Yeah, well,
like where education?
Yeah, well, you know, I think the NAACP is as active as it can be in a community where people think that segregation is over, civil rights is over, you know, and black people are not as subjected to the isolation and the organizational misrepresentation. But many ACP initiatives go unfunded, and many local NAACP branches have very minimal support and very low membership. You know.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed too. That's something I'm kind of active in now.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
No, that's something I really noticed because I don't know, something brought me to NAACP, and I just looking at the membership and everything. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
they have memberships for like kids like in elementary school, and I'm just like, I looked at them like it's cheaper to sign up like to get a kid a lifetime membership, to get a kid a lifetime membership than an adult. So it's like I kind of felt bad because I'm like it's not really the NAACP's fault. I mean it is somewhat, but it's like it's not, because I mean they put in that like emphasis that we want to get kids in here, you know, but you know, like you said, I guess it's based on the community and their belief of like what's the status of their city, you know, situation.
Yeah. It's a very mixed thing, and you know, as you know, a lot of us don't continue to support, even though most of us are first and second generational college educated successful professionals. We don't always support each other, and we don't always support the effort to continue to improve the living conditions and the educational services and voting rights and so forth for those who are still struggling to become professional and to have their kids educated properly. I mean, this whole thing about this morning I'm watching on TV where people are talking about they don't need the minimum wage in Virginia at $15. They're happy to take it at $11. What are you talking about? You know, I mean, where is that kind of thinking? Because you know who's making minimum wage, right? So how I say that we all have to do something or else we're going to always be facing the same issues. Because if I walk out of my house and I'm away from where people know who I am or what I stand for or what I do, I'm a black person, and I'm subject to the same prejudices and the same issues of safety and violation of my right as any other black person who's making $11 an hour. And the only thing that separates me from them is the fact that I'm an educated person who had opportunities that they didn't have. And so without education, I'm big for the best education possible makes the best difference, makes the most difference. You start these kids off little and they don't become, victims to poverty and crime and negligence and lack of self-confidence and all of that. So it's the NACP and so forth, but that's community to community. And a lot of places that there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing.
So are you familiar with Lloyd Gaines, like the Supreme Court case of Lloyd Gaines?
Of who?
Lloyd Gaines.
Gaines?
Yeah, Lloyd Gaines. He was a student he was a student. I think it's like Mississippi somewhere, but he basically sued the Supreme Court. I mean, sued the Supreme Court. He sued I think it was Lincoln. I know this better than what I'm saying, but he eventually basically was suing to be into law, to have like law schools for blacks because yeah, Mizzou, that's what it was. Mizzou. I should know I'm from St. Louis, right? But yeah, he sued Missouri, University of Missouri, because he wasn't accepted to the law school program, and I mean, the Supreme Court ended up finding out ruling basically that blacks should have their own law schools if they're not allowed to go to law schools.
Right.
The predominantly white schools. I think it might have been a little before, probably like in the 40s ish, but he kind of something like how you say Roy S. Wilson kind of disappeared. Like to this day, they haven't found Lloyd Gaines. And people
oh, really? Okay.
He went incognito or something.
Yeah.
But I know his Supreme Court case was big because it was like kind of like the Brown versus Board of Education situation.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. You don't see too many class action suits against desegregating anything. The problem is funding and continued support. And you have, in a lot of places, public education, not universities and colleges as much, but public schools being predominantly all black because of the way in which the school districts are organized to provide de facto segregation and continuing to have not integrating the schools, not figuring out how to destroy totally black schools. Because if you have a totally black school in a community, it's not going to be as good as the schools that are not totally black. Why would you want to have an all black school? Black people don't want that because they know if it's all black, it's not going to be getting the same support that an integrated school would get. So that's the kind of stuff that I try to, people talk to me about and so forth. But I don't seem to get involved anymore with other than the historical perspective of state universities and things like that. The idea of getting more black in and keeping them in and getting them to graduate, yes, and having support for them to have offices and diversity and have black counselors and black faculty there and like that makes a big difference, And LSU hasn't always had that. They have it now, but they need more of it,
Yeah, same from
So,
Mizzou.
Yeah. So that's
another question. Hey, what were you saying?
Yeah. So that's basically what I'm, into. So whatever you write, Harlan, let me have a copy of it, okay?
I definitely send it to you. Just another question. I know you went to Columbia with so what was the elitism of Ivy League? I know it's like it's in New York City and New York City progressive, but like what was kind of that elitism or like that what's the word for? I guess like because Columbia it was segregated at that point, wasn't it? Somewhat.
Oh no. Columbia,
Oh,
no. Columbia wasn't. No, I never had a problem at Columbia. That I was at Columbia. I was there for 2 semesters for this fall and the spring semester in 1958, 59. 1958. So I was only there for 2 semesters, but I knew New York. My parents had, we always traveled in the summertime and so forth and so on. I had an uncle that lived in Brooklyn and stuff like that, but I lived on campus. I didn't have any problem. And then, when I was at Xavier, then I'm going to have to go because I have an appointment later. But when I was at Xavier, I was a junior at Xavier, and I was very well involved with all of the activities at the school and so forth and so on. I said to my father, when I graduate from Xavier next year, I want to go to graduate school, and I want to go to an integrated university, because when I leave here, I want to be able to compete with anyone anywhere, and I want to make sure what I'm getting at Xavier is competitive. And I knew it was good, but we always have to think. The worst part about segregation is you wonder whether you're competitive.
yeah, that's another question I have. Like, what's your experience like with like how do you feel about HB like say the HBCUs now and then like like elite schools like Ivy League or like the Big Five conferences type schools.
Right. Are kids at Harvard smarter than me? No, they're not smarter. So, but anyway, I wanted to make sure I was competitive. So I said, so my father said, so what do you want to do? So I said, well, summer's coming up. I've got one more year at Xavier. I'd like to go to a big white integrated university for summer school, and I'll take 2 courses. Can I do that? He said, sure, you go. I'll help you with that. So I went to Catholic University in Washington, D.C. I knew Washington. My sister was living in Baltimore. She got married. I knew people in Baltimore. I knew people in Washington. We used to go to Washington all the time because my parents were at Howard and they had friends and stuff. So I felt comfortable going because I was going to find a place to live. I wasn't going to live on campus that time. I was going to live in, like the Y or stay in one of the student houses or something, whatever. And so I went to Catholic University and I took two graduate courses in psychology. I was interested in that. And I did well. I got an A and a B. And I was just as good as anybody else there, and I was still, an undergraduate. So that helped me when I applied to Columbia to feel, okay, I can do Columbia. I'll go to Ivy League school. So I went to Columbia, and I didn't have any problems. I got A's and B's, and I did well. And when I got to Columbia, it wasn't because, but I got a grant from the federal government that paid all of my tuition and part of my room and board. But it wasn't competitive academically. They were starting a new program to work with handicapped people coming out of the war in the VA, and I applied for the grant, and I got it. So I was just in the right place at the right time. But that's the kind of thing. Yeah,
Before you go, like, is there any reason you didn't go into the law field? Because
I didn't want to. I didn't want to go into law. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I really liked being in education, and this was something that I got through to work in the VA hospital, and I did the program, and then I didn't have to work there because they wouldn't hire me in New Orleans in a VA hospital because they were still segregated. So they told me I didn't have to pay back. When you signed into this grant program, I had to work 3 years as a VA counselor with disabled veterans. And when they interviewed me for a job after I graduated, they told me they wouldn't hire me in Louisiana, so I didn't have to pay back the grant, and I didn't have to work for them. So I got a job working with handicapped people, and that's when I went to White Plains, which is what I wanted. I just didn't work for them, but I took advantage of the grant money and so forth and so on, you know. But so here I was, a good student at Xavier, exposed to a lot of things, exposed to a lot of people, lots of opportunities, and I still had the need to see if I was a competitive student. Think of the kids who don't have the opportunities that I had, who feel like they may not, well, maybe I'm not as competitive as white kids. Maybe I'm not as smart as white kids. You know, we have this fantasy that white people are smarter sometimes because they have more opportunity. Yeah, you know, so I use that principle, and I talk to teachers all over the country and university professors and college presidents about we have an issue of dealing with competition because you have told us that we are not as good as everybody else, or we are not as smart as everybody else, and we're smarter and better, and we're like everybody else. And what we want is the same things you want. We just want to have a good life, that's all. We want to be able to buy a good house, have good insurance, send our sons to good schools, have good health insurance, and have a happy life. That's all we want. We don't take anything from you, but we want to have the same things that you want. And we can do it. You know, that kind of stuff. So I've had an opportunity to share that with, and I don't bite my tongue. You know, when the president of LSU told me I was going to, you know, get a doctorate and honorary degree and all of that, and I thanked him a lot. And they got rid of him after he did that because he was too liberal. It wasn't because of me, but because he was tired of fighting with all these Southern. And that was in 2011. Mike Martin, he went to university somewhere in the Midwest. He said, "I'm tired of all this. I need to go somewhere else." Well, I don't know that the Midwest is any better anymore, considering all the things that are going on all over.
That's all synonymous.
That's right. You know, and they don't have any black people to worry about. They don't, you know, you think about these people in Wisconsin, Wyoming. Why are they so prejudiced and conservative and whatever? But anyway, so I said to Mike Martin, Mike, thanks for the honorary degree. I said, but you know, if LSU recruited the faculty, black faculty, the way they recruit the athletes, you wouldn't have a serious problem because you need more black faculty. Even now at LSU, very limited black faculty. And now they have a search for president. I wonder how many people they've vetted for the president's job. I don't think probably any, and not seriously, because it has to be approved by the state legislature. So all of that stuff goes on, you know. But I don't bite my tongue because I don't owe them anything, you know, and I don't work for them. So that's why I say, now you have to do it in a polite way. I'm not dishonoring people or being rude or crude, but I say what I have to say because people have to hear this from us in a way that helps them, perhaps, as I say, think differently. And that's the way my father was. Let's talk about this. Let's look at where the issues are and what can you do to make things better. And when are you going to do these things? You know, so it was a pleasure talking to you, Harlan.
Yeah, same for you.
And you have my email stuff. Let me know what you write so I can take a look at it. Do whatever you want with it. Yep. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And once I get it published, I'll definitely send it to you.
Okay. Dope. Terrific.
All right.
Keep in touch.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Peace.